Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. My name is Soha Youssef, and I'm convening this seminar series on behalf of unu-merit and Maastricht University in the Netherlands. The Migration Seminar Series invites researchers, practitioners, policymakers, and others to discuss their work related to migration. Before I will introduce today's speaker, there are some housekeeping that I'd like to bring up to you. So our speakers talk today would last approximately 40 minutes, after which we'll have around 15 minutes for discussion and questions from the audience. I'd like to ask you to keep your questions until after our speaker is done with their presentation, unless, of course, it's a clarification question. You can use the raise the hand button and ask it. So you can either ask your question in the chat or use the raise the hand function to be allocated a turn to ask a question. Please, in the meantime, keep your microphones unmuted. Your camera can be turned on if you would like to, but please be aware that we are recording the seminar for distribution via our YouTube channel. And on our YouTube channel, you can find all the recordings from the previous seminars. Now, let me introduce today's speaker, Mattia Polvanesi. I hope I did not mess up the family name too much, has been the social protection technical lead with the UNHCR headquarters in Geneva since 2022. As part of the Division of Resilience and Solutions, he leads UNHCR global work on the inclusion of forcibly displaced people in national social protection systems with a focus on contexts of protracted displacement. His career in the field of social protection spans across over 15 years, working for different international institutions, including the WFP, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees, UNRWA, the European Union, and NGOs. His area of expertise include policy formulation, strategic advice, and technical support to governments in strengthening the design and implementation of national social protection programs. With that being said, I would like to give the floor to Mattia. Mattia, thank you so much for making the time to be with us today.
Thank you, Soha. Thanks to unu-merit for inviting me in this webinar, and I'm really pleased to be here. So yes, you introduced me already, so I don't need to say anything, and the spelling of the family name was perfect. So today, I'm not gonna talk about an academic paper. I did write some of them on the topic, but I thought it could be interesting to really talk about more the operational approach that UNHCR, but I would say also in general other UN agencies and operational partners adopt when it comes to social protection responses to displacement, and more specifically, the issue of inclusion of refugees and other displaced people into national social protection systems. I'd be more than happy to really get questions from you, ideally at the end. So I'll try to stick to really I can talk about this topic for 3 hours, but I will try to keep it within maybe 30 minutes or so, and then really pose it there and get your questions and really see also whether, maybe that's also something we can discuss. And maybe, so if you can give me a bit of a heads up around 30 minutes so that I can, if I'm going long, I will wrap up. All right, so the first part, I will talk more about some definitions and legal frameworks globally, although some of it you may be familiar with most of it. And then the second part will be more on the field approaches and field practices, how all of this applies to concrete situations on the ground. So yes, I mean, starting point being the definition of social protection as a human right, and really as a government sector that does have a very important protection function. First of all, we should never forget that protection is one of the core functions of social protection, along with promotion and prevention of certain life cycle risks. Also, this is, I mean, a presentation mutated from other type of events. So usually the problem of this, the challenge with this type of topic is that it kind of falls through the cracks of people that may be very familiar with social protection or very familiar with humanitarian work or displacement work, and very few people are familiar with both, so you kind of have to sometimes take a step back. But social protection, so it's a sector that is managed and led by the government. It has longer term objectives beyond immediate saving lives, but really looking at addressing poverty and root causes of vulnerabilities. And as we will see in a minute, also it's embedded in a right-based framework, which means that governments can be held to account, and in some cases are held to account for obligations to fulfill these social protection rights. And then humanitarian assistance usually steps in to fill the gap when the state is unable or unwilling to provide this support to his citizens. Why do we link then displacement and forced displacement with social protection systems? So the first range of arguments is that the displacement has been evolving quite dramatically over the past years and decades. It's become more complex. The scale of displacement has increased dramatically, according to the latest data for UNHCR. In terms of, we're talking about forced displacement, so not migration. It's over 123 million forcibly displaced people globally. Of course, the last few years with Ukraine, Sudan, Afghanistan, I mean, they really pushed the figures way beyond the 100 million threshold for the first time. Out of these, we have almost 37 million refugees, which tripled over the last 10 years. And the second important aspect is also that emergencies are increasingly long and protracted, and they require humanitarian assistance for decades sometimes, which of course it's unsustainable. And here the statistic is that 77% of refugees are displaced for are considered in protracted displacement, which for UNHCR means more than 5 years in the same displacement country, but the average is actually a lot more. I think it's around 11 years. So really, that's also a key feature, and also a key argument that says that really the threshold between what is humanitarian and what is social protection is increasingly blurred. Also displaced, they live increasingly among host communities in urban areas. So there is less and less encampment policy, and also something that UNHCR has been pushing quite a lot to move away from. And also 73% of refugees are hosted in lower and middle income countries, which of course raises some questions also on the feasibility of catering for their needs. The second range of arguments is that also social protection systems have been growing quite substantially over the past couple of decades, although of course their maturity and their strength depends a lot on the regions and countries. And also I think it's important to signal how social protection systems have been increasingly also being used for also prevent or respond to emergencies and shocks, the whole shock responsive or adaptive social protection agenda. And this basically calls for some considerations around the efficiency of using one single system to support nationals and displaced communities versus having parallel systems. And also some considerations around the equity of treatment between displaced and host communities. So just to conclude maybe on this slide, because of all these evolving factors, inclusion in national social protection systems is really a concrete way to not only advance on protection and development goals for refugees and other displaced people, but it's also a step towards achieving durable solutions, which have been more and more elusive for refugees, being the traditional durable solutions, being complementary pathways, local integration, reintegration, resettlements, and voluntary repatriation. Sorry, these three. And less than 1% of refugees are actually able to realize that on every year. Yes, so in terms of the international instruments that talk about this, of the 1951 Convention on the Status of Refugees already included some considerations around the right to certain pillars of social protections for refugees. And then, aside from the 51 Convention, you have two main bodies of international law that are relevant. Basically, all the human rights instruments and human rights conventions and covenants that recognize the universality of the right to social protection. And on the other hand, also all the social security conventions and ILO conventions that recognize the equality of treatment for non-nationals. So that's another very important principle that has been recognized already since the 60s. And then I think fast forward 2018, an important milestone was the Global Compact on Refugees in 2018, which signaled increasing commitments by the international community, by host countries, to ensure that refugees are increasingly accessing national systems, including social protection systems. And these commitments are regularly updated and monitored through the Global Refugee Forum, which happens every 4 years. The first one was in 2019, second one in 2023. This is just a snapshot of the 2023 Global Refugee Forum, which included a multi-stakeholder pledge on economic inclusion and social protection. And over 270 pledges were made linked to this goal of economic inclusion and social protection inclusion of refugees, including 88 pledges done by states, host or donor. And here you can have just an idea of the main areas that those pledges are covering. And broadly speaking, they can be either around law and policy reform, actual programs that can be scaled up or for refugees, as well as data and evidence. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if I will talk too much about this, but again, linked to the principle of universality of the right to social protection. There were a number of initiatives that the UN has launched linked to the Sustainable Development Goals. One is the Universal Social Protection Agenda for 2030. And the concept of leaving no one behind. And this is really something that it's already not on track, but clearly it will never be on track if we don't consider the issue of including also displaced communities. And maybe also to mention that some international actors, in this case, the World Bank Group also created specific financing instruments to open windows for inclusion of host communities and refugees in governmental sectors, including social protection. So here you have the logo of the IDA window for host communities and refugees. There are also similar initiatives also in other in other development actors that have, let's say, a twin track of building a system, but also ensuring it opens windows also for refugees. Yes, maybe I will just pause a bit here to say that moving slowly into the more the concrete part of the presentation, and to spend a few words on the importance of contextualization. And there is no single approach or single way that fits all the possible cases. We need to look at basically what are the trade-offs also of linking between humanitarian assistance for refugees and national social protection systems. I think here you see how the context will dictate whether there is no link, and basically humanitarian assistance is implemented in parallel to the national system, and it's completely humanitarian-led, humanitarian-funded. And that's the case when, for example, we have displacement due to conflict, and the state is part to the conflict. That's basically the way that people that are displaced because of the conflict will receive assistance. But then when is relevant, and sometimes this is a request by host governments, and when the host government is actually more benign towards the displaced population, then the humanitarian actors can gradually align their operations to government social assistance programs. And these can be done in a various ways, adapting the targeting process, registration that is aligned, having similar transfer values, and it's still, I would say, very much humanitarian-led, but it's centered on social protection basically as a reference point. And this is also a step that reduces disparities of treatment between the two communities and may create opportunities for inclusion in the future. In other contexts, basically, it's when we look at humanitarian actors that use certain elements of the social protection sector, such as the payment system or the case management system, and those systems are used by humanitarian actors to support displaced communities. And that's somehow an intermediary step towards a situation of full inclusion, where displaced people are enrolled in the National Social Registry and receive the same benefits and services that citizens do. Um, yeah. The next slide is basically in the same vein of the previous one to say that context is really important. It's important that also we look at displacement not as a continuum, as it seemed to be in the previous slide with the arrow going from left to right, but more as a cycle. And oftentimes in countries we also have different displacement crises coexisting in the same country at the same time. If we think about Ethiopia, for example, you have a refugee caseload, you have an IDP emergency, and you need to look at those very differently when you think about inclusion in government systems. Um, and so when formulating a country strategy and identifying modalities for engaging with the government social protection system, we need to basically look at three main factors or lenses, which you will see in this infographic. So first of all, the displacement cycle. So where if it's an emergency with acute displacement, or if it's a protracted displacement situation, or if we are transitioning to durable solutions, which is the so starting from the emergency, that would be the displacement cycle, protracted durable solutions, and context of fragility. Another layer and factor that needs to be taken into account when looking at the feasibility in a given country is the population type that is present in the country and its legal status. Of course, huge differences if we're talking about refugees or asylum seekers as non-nationals, as opposed to, for example, IDPs. And the third layer to consider is the political will, and more specifically, also the strength and the maturity of the social protection system. So having said all that, basically, broadly speaking and oversimplifying, you can see how in a context of a shock, after a shock occurs, after an emergency response is provided, the idea is to, from the beginning, look at how humanitarian assistance operations can be aligned with any existing social protection system and program. And in time, when the caseload becomes protracted, then opportunities may arise to work on the inclusion in the social protection program as a pathway to a durable solution. And last but not least, when inclusion occurs, durable solutions are achieved. It's also important, the next step is also to ensure that those social protection systems are also shock responsive, meaning that there are contingency mechanisms that can be activated when a shock occurs and when displacement, new arrivals, for example, or new displacement occurs. So this slide is, I will not go through it. It's a bit dense, but this is how UNHCR looks at all of this. I will simplify it for you, but basically we always start with a feasibility analysis, looking at all these factors that I just mentioned, and based on this feasibility analysis, we identify different tracks for engaging with social protection systems, and to each track there are a number of activities that may be implemented, which are listed here, from advocacy, alignments, leveraging socioeconomic data for building an investment case for inclusion, and moving to more advanced and technical activities, which imply, for example, including refugees into social registries, training social workers, supporting access to social protection programs, either existing or new programs, and linking with economic and financial inclusion. And this is just to, looking at one of these activities, which is basically looking at what social protection programs and systems are already existing in a given country. And I think there have been experiences where some actors assumed that those programs and systems could be simply replicated for refugees, which clearly wasn't possible because refugees face additional barriers and additional vulnerabilities linked to their displacement situations. And this means that social protection programs require to be slightly tweaked and adapted to make sure that those barriers and vulnerabilities are addressed, and to make sure that the program design and delivery is adapted to the needs and to the capacities of refugees. And that's why in this slide, what we can see is how this adaptation works along the social protection delivery chain. So on the bottom part of the screen is a traditional model used by the World Bank and others on how a given social protection program is designed and delivered and monitored. And basically what we realize is that there are a number of actions that need to be taken at each stage of a social protection program delivery to make sure that these programs can reach effectively also, in this case, refugees. So in the assessment stage, as mentioned earlier, it is required that national and actors, with the support, oftentimes, if we are talking about lower and middle income countries, by international actors, the work on feasibility analysis and specifically develop and construct an investment case for inclusion, which should have also embedded some cost modeling and scenarios of how inclusion would work over time. These also require, still at the assessment stage, that the rights to these social protections that there is some awareness raised for refugees themselves on their own rights, but also on how the social protection system functions in the host country, and also some legal support on accessing those rights, and specifically, for example, on registering into enrolling into the program itself. A lot of work here happens in terms also of statistical inclusion, inclusion in poverty assessments, socioeconomic surveys and censuses, and so on. Ultimately, also in administrative registries, like social registries, which are the main gateway for being enrolled in social protection programs. The second step, enrollment, I mean, I already covered it. It's about using all this data, socioeconomic data, that is essential to eventually including this data into national social registries and ensuring that they can be used for determining eligibility of refugees alongside national citizens for social protection programs. This, of course, requires a lot of consideration in terms of data privacy, data protection, and interoperability between data sets and databases that humanitarian actors have with government information management systems. Thirdly, in the provision phase, it is necessary oftentimes that international actors accompany both the beneficiaries and also the social protection entities. This may mean training these agencies and social workers on protection, on rights, on financial inclusion, but also translation services, even reaching the actual places where refugees reside. And I think also a lot of work here on intention surveys, movements, modeling that can inform integration in social protection programs. Last but not least, the last step is monitoring. I think here there are two main steps. One is monitoring the actual reception of benefits by the refugees, but also monitoring the impact of inclusion. And that's something that often gets overlooked because it's complicated and it's time consuming. But where inclusion happens, it's important that we understand what's the impact on the refugees, on their lives and livelihoods, on their protection concerns, and that action is then also taken to adapt and revise humanitarian programming accordingly and ensure that it's not discontinued in abruptly, but it's continued and it's used as a top-up in case that's needed, and in case social protection inclusion is partial, for example. Yes, so I'm approaching the end, so I'll mention a few examples that are quite interesting. So Iraq, you will find quite substantial literature online by the Cash Consortium for Iraq and by other actors. It's a work that has been going on, I believe, since 2017-18, and it's really linked with the whole transition of the Iraq, let's say, humanitarian framework into the UN Sustainable Development Cooperation framework. And as part of that, social protection is one of the components. IDPs, some IDPs have been included in the flagship social safety net program. And also recently there have been some discussions around relaunching the social safety net program in the Kurdistan region, ideally including also refugees from the onset. And statistical inclusion in Iraq was an important prerequisite and an enabling factor for programmatic inclusion. Mauritania is another interesting example where the protracted caseload of about 15,000 refugees were registered in the government social registry through a joint data collection exercise. And about 50% of those were found eligible to receive social cash assistance, which is called Takaful. This is still financed through World Bank external financing, but it's fully embedded in the government system. In Kenya, also it's interesting because inclusion has been happening now for a number of years across the different levels. So at the policy level, there has been last year, I believe, the new social protection bill, the new social protection law, which mentions refugees. And also the refugees have been included in the enhanced social registry that the government has been rolling out for the past couple of years. And also at the programmatic level, refugees have been able to access social health protection, maternity cash benefits, and also social insurance through the Haba Haba scheme, which is basically a government led social insurance package for informal workers. We are nearing the end. I see so I'll perhaps go to. So these are two papers that I contributed to, and they're not published yet, but they were presented at a recent conference that was hosted by the Institute for Development Studies in Brighton. And I encourage you, if you're interested in the topic, to also look at the conference. I think they published a book of abstracts, as there are many papers that are coming out also covering this topic. But here I can quickly go through these two papers. So one we did together with ODI and with UNICEF, and it looked at 5 case studies: Lebanon, Ethiopia, Romania, Kenya, and Brazil. And basically, the whole point was to show that even in challenging contexts, let's take, surely Lebanon, very complicated with many layers of emergencies and a very fragmented social protection system. And yet it was possible to, again, heavily subsidized internationally, but to have the national disability allowance to be extended also for refugees. Or Ethiopia, as I mentioned, multiple displacement crises happening simultaneously. So even in this context, it is possible to look at linkages between displacement and the social protection system. And these linkages, they vary substantially within the same country, which is the case in those two countries I mentioned, but also over time. That's, for example, if we look at Romania, but also other countries that hosted the Ukraine refugees, what was interesting is that governments oftentimes created sort of transitional social assistance schemes for refugees, but gradually also removed the barriers for inclusion into regular social protection systems. So, and also this work on inclusion doesn't really follow a linear progression, as sometimes we see. It depends really. Sometimes we have legal inclusion first, by law. That's the case in Kenya, and then we look at effective inclusion, removal of barriers, and sometimes effective or de facto inclusion may come first. So it's not linear. The second paper was more specific to Europe, in a broad sense, so not just European Union, but the whole continent, and was an analysis of some quantitative data that we have around access to social protection in some 44 countries across Europe. Some of the highlights is that basically in Europe, the complexity of the situation increased after the temporary protection directive was implemented for Ukraine refugees, and which created basically an additional status. And it was observed that temporary protection holders face more legal restrictions to social protection compared to the regular asylum system. It was also observed that in more countries, access to social protection occurs via labor protection, so more through the social formalized work, social insurance, and active labor market policies, more than social assistance or social care services. And as I was saying earlier, also, we saw a proliferation of these time-bound ad hoc social schemes specifically for refugees and asylum seekers. And I think our position is that in the longer term, it's more efficient to actually address the barriers to inclusion in the core system rather than have these ad hoc social schemes. Another point is on socioeconomic data, but we mentioned that already, and on the technical assistance and adaptations, so I'll not repeat. I'll conclude here. It's 40 minutes past, so I think I'm doing well with timing. So first point, inclusion in national social protection system is a key component of refugee self-reliance. It is essential to achieve protection, and also in time, it's also a pathway to durable solutions. Socioeconomic data are needed, and here there is some work done by a number of actors, but it's not nearly enough, because what we need is country-level costed inclusion investment cases that can be used for advocacy purposes with host governments in some cases, but also for mobilizing international development financing that in some cases, like especially in lower middle income countries, will be required to advance inclusion in practice. A third point is it's important that we look at the full spectrum of the social protection programs that are available in a given country. Oftentimes, some actors equate social protection with cash transfers. That's not okay, because a government may have a whole range of programs. Some are publicly financed, like social assistance. Some are required contributions by beneficiaries, like social insurance. And usually these programs are integrated among each other. So they cannot be looked at as a standalone. We need to look at the whole of social protection system and push for integration in all the programs that may exist. And of course, the impact social protection alone is not a silver bullet. We need to also link it with economic and financial inclusion and giving refugees the right to work, the freedom of movement, and the possibility to really work and ideally access formal jobs and contribute into the system through social insurance and through the tax base. And last but not least, as you surely know, this is a very complicated area, and that's why we put a lot of emphasis on the importance of partnerships and working with other agencies. I mentioned the World Bank, but also UN specialized agencies, the ILO, UNICEF, and so on. And also on the importance of some interagency guidance, some of which has been already published. You have links here to some of the work we did with the Social Protection Interagency Coordination Board. And also for those who know, there is also Transform, which is a nice training package that exists for governments on social protection that is currently being revised to add a specific module on forced displacement, among other specific modules. So I'll stop here. I added also some links here on some of the stuff I mentioned, but I'll pause it here, and I'll be super happy to get some questions.
Thank you very much, Mattia, for the presentation. I'll open the floor right away for any questions or comments. Feel free to please use the raise the hand mode or function, or drop your question on the chat box. Iselotta, please go ahead. I see you did it, I think, by mistake because you removed it. Melissa, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks so much for the talk. I really appreciated it. I do have maybe some follow-up questioning on some of the financing. So, I mean, given the current geopolitical situation that we're in, given the fact that basically USAID has shut down and a number of important big donors have cut their development budgets, how is this affecting the ability to actually give social protection and social protection programs? And I would say, particularly in situations where the programs are separated from the national programs, are you seeing effects on this?
I think we can take a few questions.
Okay. Anita, please go ahead.
Hi, Mattia. I hope you can hear me. Thanks, from my side also for the very interesting presentation. I wondered whether you could comment on how policy debates are discussing the link between social protection systems for displaced persons and migration decision making. So like, decisions to stay in a country, decisions to move onwards to another country, decisions to return. I know I'm not an expert in this, but I know that there has been some attention to this from the point of view of also using social protection to affect migration decision making. But I wondered whether this linkage also features in discussions and debates focused more on the kind of, I guess, more traditional social protection schemes or schemes that aren't explicitly focused on manipulating migration decision making or affecting it.
Any more questions before Matthias starts answering? So far, these are the only two questions, so maybe we can take them and then see where we go.
All right. So thanks for the questions. They're both very relevant, especially in the current momentum. So I'll start with the financing one from Melissa. So I mean, I don't have to elaborate on how challenging is the period we are going through, and it's not. I think it's not just a period. I think it's gonna be a new way of working, and I think we I see this also as let's put it this way. I see this also as an opportunity, because what has happened in the past is that in this area there have been significant duplications. There have been also the transitions have not been particularly smooth between humanitarian and development, despite, let's say, all the nexus narrative has very rarely trickled down at the country level in a successful way. Now we can't afford this anymore. And I think some actors are very much aware of this. And I will mention two things. So one is there is a quite important initiative that has been led mainly by the UK, by the FCDO, on building and maintaining social protection systems in conflict, fragility, and displacement settings. And this has led to the creation of a high-level panel, intergovernmental panel that is supposed to issue public findings and next week, so we may know more. I don't know what's gonna come out exactly, but just to say that at the end of the day, it's about achieving efficiencies as well. So this is a conversation that has started. I mean, the linking humanitarian social protection has been around for a while now, but specifically on displacement, maybe 5 years. It's not a long time. And I think now we can use the financing crisis in the sector to accelerate this conversation and to really push some donors and some governments that are behind this agenda to change the way things have been done and to really ensure that that transition that we want to see happens faster and more efficiently, and we avoid keeping parallel systems alive. So this is a hope. I don't know, but I think definitely that's an interesting initiative. This high-level panel that FCDO has been putting on, and also they did also some interesting research on ODA financing that goes for social protection in this type of contexts. And ideally how it can be better used. There is some you can find that online. On the second question, that's also very interesting, and my answer here will not be exhaustive. But definitely there have been, and one important. So the question is on policy debates and how these discussions around inclusion in social protection can inform or shape decision making on let's say migration routes. So one important pointer I can give you is the IMF World Economic Outlook for 2025. So it's something that they do every year, but this year, 2025, they had a chapter specifically on this. It's called Journeys and Junctions, Spillovers from Migration and Refugee Policies. So basically they analyzed, and it's very, very comprehensive, and it looks at migrants and refugees together, let's say. And they looked at basically inclusive policies and how those shaped up the routes and the changes of routes for refugees and migrants. And also they did the spillover effects of that into in terms of refugees inclusion into national frameworks. So it's not specific to social protection, of course, but it's about government frameworks and government policies. Super comprehensive analysis, which is also in something that I need to look back, but it's all published online, so you will be able to find that.
Thanks very much.
I think Melissa has a follow-up question, perhaps. Or is it the
no,
first?
Sorry, I just
No,
forgot
okay.
to lower my hand. Sorry about that.
No worries. We have 5 minutes left in case you have any questions. Feel free to drop them by. Otherwise, we could see. Okay, no, it's a comment from Fan Yang. Thank you for the presentation, which is truly inspiring and well balanced by combining both theoretical insights and practical cases. Unfortunately, they had to leave, and bravo for this one. I agree. Thank you very much, Mattia. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending. Keep an eye out for our future migration seminar series. We already have one scheduled, and it's on our website. I did not want to yet send the invite on your Outlook to not confuse you, but I will send it out tomorrow. Thank you again, and have a very lovely evening. Thank you, Mattia.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.